are you currently able to handle the number of leads that you're getting right now? And if the answer is no, I'm not effectively handling them, I would say, okay, well, how many are you missing? If it's maybe one a month, that may be one thing. But if it's a handful a month, I would say, you're missing out on potentially 60 doors each year just from what you have coming in. And that's more than enough to pay for a BDM salary at least. And that compounded year over year, you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
Welcome to Grow Outbound, the podcast that will take your outbound sales game to the next level. I'm your host, Ben Smith, interviewing industry experts to bring you the tips, tricks, and insights you need to succeed doing outbound business development for a property management company. Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned pro, we've got the actionable advice you need to get ahead. So tune in and let's grow outbound together. Today, I am joined by Brian Hughes with BizDev Mastermind, and I am really excited about this one. Brian has been in the industry for a long time and has a lot that he's going to bring to us. So, Brian, how are you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. And thanks for having me. I know we've been seeing each other around at conferences and out and about. So it's great that we're able to come on here. So I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, I think what you have to share today is going to be super valuable to the folks that are listening in. We come across a lot of folks in our conversations who are at different stages of, maybe they've just started their company and they're trying to grow. Maybe they've hit that point where they want to hire a business development person, or maybe they're looking to expand even beyond one. So I think your experience as a BDM, but also with the work you do now, is going to be super helpful. Maybe it'd be a helpful place to start. Just give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you've done in the industry.
Sure. So I started in property management in 2015 and was hired as the business development manager at then Larson Properties. Eventually became Rentworks and owned by Brad Larson, who does PMMCon and Property Management Mastermind podcast and a few other things. So that's where I got my start. Was hired as their BDM, and right away was kind of thrown into the fire, if you will. If you've met Brad, he's a big idea guy, and he said, hey, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this, and I was all for it. It was much more exciting than my previous gig first out of college, so I was happy to jump into it. So we kind of jumped right into it, and really quickly we found some success, and we built on that, and it led to us growing that company and growing Rentworks, at a pretty good clip. We added on over 1,100 doors in my first 3 years there as a business development manager. Now, not just myself, we did have a few remote team members, and we did hire another business development manager along the way. But we were able to build that business up, and is kind of what led to starting BizDev Mastermind and going from there.
That's fantastic, man. That's a ton of growth in a short amount of time. I'm just imagining that you're constantly on the phone, constantly out at properties. What was that like during that period?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that really helped is that I'm not great at organization, so I had to become better at it, and so I had to think of tricks, think of tips, use my calendar, use, all the different tools and your great CRM and use all the tools that are available to a salesperson, to a BDM, to fit all of that in. So yeah, day to day was, getting in the morning, looking at your leads that had come in, looking at what meetings you have for that day, getting those packets together, making a few calls to agents, making a video maybe, and then, the second half of your day is having a meeting. But for me, that's what I loved, is you're always doing something different, and your days were pretty varied. But yeah, some days you definitely felt like you're running around with your hair on fire. So yeah, that's definitely happens.
That's awesome. Good problems to have, right? It's better than not having anything to do when you're in a sales role, for sure. So remind me, what year did you guys start BizDev Mastermind?
We started in 2019, and we kind of started things slow. At first, I was still the BDM at Rentworks, and then eventually we hired a replacement for myself and went full time into BizDev Mastermind. But yeah, we started in 2019.
Okay, cool. And maybe we're going to get into it a little bit deeper, but tell us a little bit more about BizDev Mastermind, what you guys are focused on.
Yeah, so we take what we've learned in growing a property management business, again, starting at Rentworks and going from around 500 properties there when I first started to now I think they're managing over 1,500 units across a couple different markets. So we took what we learned in growing that business and applied it into a training program and a consulting program that is BizDev Mastermind. And really it started from, I'd have other property managers who'd find me on Facebook and they'd say, hey, Brian, how are you guys generating so many leads? Or, how are you guys closing so much? And, I just wanted to talk sales. So I'd hop on the phone with them and say, okay, here's what we're doing. It's great. It's awesome. And I'd give them the scoop. And I got to thinking, I think Brad got to thinking too, maybe there's a business here. And so we kind of took that model, obviously refined it over time and perfected it, I think, to now what we do is hiring business development managers, training business development staff, and just working with companies to help them grow their business.
Fantastic, man. I love it. Well, let's start with your time at Rentworks and Larson Property Management.
Sure.
Obviously, we've heard a little bit about the success that you guys had, and I'd love to know a little bit more. Obviously, everybody wants to generate leads, right? Like I would bet 9 times out of 10 when somebody comes to you, they're like, I want more leads. So talk a little bit about how that evolved over time for you guys while you were a BDM and what you saw as most successful during that, really fruitful period.
Yeah, that's a great question, and things definitely have changed over time. There are some things that have kind of gone away, and others that maybe BDMs and clients we work with lean more into. But at that time when I first started, 2016, social media was huge, and Facebook ads were a lot bigger than they are now. There's a lot of regulation and things that have changed them. But we would do a lot of digital advertising, so we'd run Facebook ads and we'd run Google ads, and those probably accounted for maybe 30% of our lead flow at certain times. But that's something that's changed. Facebook ads and Google ads have gotten a lot different, and we can get into that if you want. But so that was one part of our kind of mix. Another, I'd say 30-40% of our leads came from SEO, from just continually creating content, continually improving the website. Someone may ask us about, how do you switch the power over? Simple questions like that. And we take those questions, create a web page, and put it on the website. And then before you know it, our website has every answer for any client could possibly need. Yeah. And it also makes it easier for us as a salesperson, because someone asks you a question, you're like, hey, here's a link. It has a video and a full explanation of what you need to know. So SEO, in short, was another opportunity. And then kind of the third portion would have been realtor referrals and events. And those kind of coincide to some degree. But yeah, we had a realtor referral program that we would promote. We would, go to events and speak at brokerages and do different things like that to kind of get the word out. So yeah, digital advertising, SEO, and referrals were what worked for us back in those days.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, I think for anybody that's been in this business for any amount of time, right, it evolves. And the SEO part, for instance, is great, but algorithms change, and you've got to stay at the cutting edge of how to keep your name right there on the first page of Google to get people's attention. So that stuff's interesting. Let me ask you this: like, obviously, you've got multiple channels that you're bringing people in through. You're talking to the folks that you're able to generate through those avenues. What are some of the KPIs that you guys tracked as a business to really make sure that you're making the most out of all these opportunities? I'd be curious to hear like different close rates you saw for different types of leads, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yes, definitely. So, I mean, some of the KPIs, we, of course, we're tracking lead flow, how many leads are we getting in a given month, where are leads coming from by source. And I kind of talked a little bit about that based on our lead sources. But yeah, you hit on a really big one, which is closing rate. And what we would see is that, our Google leads and our social media leads would, have a closing rate of maybe 10%, whereas our agent referrals would maybe have a closing rate of 50%. And, our SEO was kind of somewhere in the middle, somewhere on Google. So, the pay-per-click leads sometimes can be, and they still exist, plenty of companies run Google leads and Facebook ads and stuff like that. But if you look at the cost per lead and the cost per conversion for a lot of companies, and eventually for us, it just didn't make sense to do it anymore. So yeah, it is interesting the difference in conversion rate based on a lead source.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the things that's interesting to me about the situation you were in with RentWorks, right? Like San Antonio, there are a lot of, good professional property managers. There's a huge NARPM presence there, a lot of competition in terms of folks that are looking for professional management. Be curious to know for you guys, how did you, add value for your prospects in a way that made you stand out and, helped you win as much business as you guys did during that period of time?
Yeah, I think part of it was that it is so competitive. We couldn't just say, hey, we're going to collect the rent, we're going to handle the maintenance, we're going to, find you a tenant, because everyone was doing that, and everyone for the most part was doing that pretty well. So we had to come up with some different programs and some different things to highlight that did make us a little bit different. Part of it was our pricing. When I first started, we had just switched to the 3-tiered pricing model, and people would call in and they'd say, y'all don't do the 8-10%, right? You're like a flat fee, $100, $200, something like that. And so just that alone was kind of piquing their interest, and they're calling in to kind of figure out more about that. Now it's not. It's a lot more common that you find a flat fee company, and maybe that's not as much of a differentiator. But that was kind of part of it. Another part of it was the people and process. So when I talk to someone, I wouldn't say, we have a great leasing program. I would say our leasing program goes through Andrea. Andrea is like the ultimate, the ultimate sayer. So she's going to know if they're going to be a good fit. She's going to make sure you find the right tenant. Then we're going to pass over to one of our property managers. And they've been there for years, and here's what they do. So I talk about the people who are actually doing the job, the process that we've developed to, make it work. And I think that, in some cases would help it stick for prospects or clients.
Well, I think that's an extremely good point. So many people, we experience this now and, on the vendor side, right? Like so often people make a decision, and whether or not you've done everything exactly right, they immediately have some sort of buyer's remorse, right? It's just like a natural feeling. I have that when I spend money on something. So laying out for them what they can expect immediately after they sign up with you, you're showing them, you're taking some of the fear of change out of it by saying, hey, look, like this is exactly the person that you're going to talk to. Here's how long they've been doing this job, and here's the steps that they're going to take. I mean, I think that's a really important thing to emphasize for sure.
And building on that, I should mention in San Antonio we have 3 large military bases and a huge military population. So that kind of naturally creates a lot of accidental landlords, people who, bought a house and now they're being, moved somewhere else across the country, and they don't want to sell, they want to rent it, or, whatever the situation. So a lot of times when those folks would call in, and they were the majority of our business, I'd say at least 70% of our clients had one property. And they come with a lot of fear. They've never listed a property for rent. They're not sure about the process. They're not sure what a property manager does. They've heard horror stories, and they definitely don't want to deal with any of that. So the clearer you can give them that information and explain exactly what's going to happen, and explain why the way you do it is better than the way other people are doing it, kind of helps put their mind at ease.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and that's another important point that we could talk about for a long time, which is, knowing the avatar of the client that you're talking to, right? Whether it's an investor or somebody that's more of an accidental landlord, it's definitely important to know your audience, right? Because they're going to have different pain points and care about different things for sure.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about BizDev Mastermind. It's funny because like we just talked about at trade shows and conferences, I'll have somebody come up to the Discover booth, and I'm showing them this data tool of these different investors that they can prospect to, and it's always interesting to ask, like, do you currently have a BDM? Are you the BDM? Like it's different for everybody in terms of where they are as a company. And so one of the things I really want to talk to you about is this process that really starts with like even just considering it. Like the ideas in your head, maybe, somebody has built a business, they've got 100 doors, 150 doors, they've built it all on their own, they're wearing all the hats, and they're starting to ask this question of like, okay, if I want to get to where I need to go, should I take this leap and hire a business development manager? So I guess the question I would start with for you is, as a business owner, owner of a property management company, how does that business owner know if they're ready, or what are some of the things that you see most commonly are maybe pain points or limitations that they're realizing that get them to start thinking about this? it?
Yeah, definitely. There's generally a few different categories or a few different situations business owners will find themselves in when they're looking to hire their first BDM. And then the future ones are more based on numbers and production and how you can scale. But the first one in particular, there's a few situations. One situation, there's an owner of a business who is they just can't keep up with the leads. And, they're not adequately following up with people. Maybe they don't even have a CRM, maybe they don't have any sales process or even marketing materials in some cases, but, they're growing in their particular market for, any number of reasons. Maybe there's not a lot of competition. Maybe they just are really charismatic, maybe they have great pricing structure, whatever. But they're in that situation where they just can't keep up with the leads. And that's the best scenario to be in to hire a BD. That's the ideal situation and what we want to build to. So that's kind of one scenario. For others, they're in a spot where they've kind of reached a plateau and they're thinking, me as myself, either I don't have the skills for this, I don't have the drive for this, or I don't have the time for this, whatever it may be. And I just cannot push past this level, but I want to, and I'm determined to, but I can't do it on my own. So in that case, you may look at hiring a BDM. And then the third case we've come across is some people are, they're managing 50 doors or 100 doors. And they're saying, hey, I want to get to 1,000 in the next, 2 years. They have lofty goals and they want to, they want to go for it. And that's great too. You can, if you find the right person to help you build your business, can definitely help you get there a lot faster. So those are the three situations I typically see.
Interesting. Okay. And I think too, one of the things that's true about this business is, sometimes the founder, the person that started it, they do have sales ability, right? And so that can carry them for a long time. Others, they're more of the integrator, more of the doer, right? They enjoy the work of the property management, the asset management, but maybe sales isn't necessarily where they are most gifted. And so, the idea of bringing somebody in both cases, I can see the fear. What I'd be curious to know is for the profile of the person that is good at sales, they have grown this business by themselves, right? Do you find it's hard for them to let go of the responsibility of selling?
Sometimes, but honestly, typically not. I think a lot of times they kind of get it. They understand the sales game. They understand, what the amount of work it took to get them to that point. Because some people might look at a great salesperson and think, oh, they just, speak a few nice words and, they get the sale. But there's a lot more to it than that, as we know. So typically not. They're not as involved. So it is nice when the owner has that sales background because they kind of understand the steps that are going to need to be taken. But regardless, we work with our clients to make sure that, these are the expectations. These are, what should be happening. But that's what we'll see.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, the next question I have for you is one that you probably get all the time when somebody's at this stage of thinking about hiring a BDM, or maybe they've had a BDM and they're hiring their next one. I want to talk a little bit about compensation because I think that's interesting in sales in general across industries, right? And how you choose to compensate. But maybe talk through the different models that you've seen and what you tend to think is most successful in terms of comp for a BDM.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the model that we recommend, and then I'll give you a couple examples of ones that we've seen not quite work as well. What we would recommend for our clients is a base salary and then a commission structure on top of that. So the salary, depending on your market, is generally in the range between 40,000 and maybe as much as 65, maybe even pushing close to 70,000 if you're in, one of those New York City, LA type markets. So a salary in that range and then a bonus structure on top of that. The bonus structure is typically a percentage of the management fee revenue. So if they bring in a home that generates the company a little bit more revenue, they get a little bit more bonus, and vice versa. And then there's also performance bonuses where that percentage may increase depending on the number of doors or the amount of revenue brought in. So that's the salary or the compensation we would recommend. I often have clients who say, well, hey, I've been a realtor and, I know how it is on straight commission. Why don't we just hire someone straight commission? I'll pay them $2,000 a deal or $1,000 a deal, whatever it takes, But we caution against that. And the reason is that the business development manager is not just a sales agent. You are not feeding them leads and they're closing them. Now, if you do have that scenario set up, that's totally different and that may work. But for most companies, when they're hiring a business development manager, they want them to do more than just close leads. So So that's why we pay the salary, is to pay for that portion of the job that's beyond just meeting with prospects, following up with prospects, and doing those straight sales activities.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and I think in your example, those two different models, I would imagine that somebody that does have a base salary as well, their incentives are a little bit more aligned to bring on doors that are going to be quality management contracts, right? Like I would imagine as a BDM, you experienced, right? You might talk to someone and it's like, well, I'd really like to close the sale, but I know that this person's going to be difficult to work with. And if somebody's straight commission, right, they may be more inclined to go ahead and sign that deal that is going to create pain for the team later on if they do onboard, right?
Yeah, that is definitely the case, and that is a constant struggle. Sales and operations. Salespeople, we want to make every deal work, but operations knows that that's just not possible. But yeah, I agree. You're aligning your goals, and it's hard to tell someone straight commission that we don't want to take this because it's going to be too much work. So yeah, I agree with that. The salary definitely helps.
Yeah. So let's say that, the business owner here has decided, okay, I'm ready to hire a BDM, right? I'd be curious to know from your standpoint, you guys do this as a service for folks. What are some of the key attributes that you're looking for when you're talking to people on behalf of a client, right? I want to identify what are the things that this person really needs to have in order to be successful. How do you see those?
Sure. So when we're hiring for a client, we don't typically want someone with no sales experience. They have to have some sales experience. That's important, and just to kind of cut your teeth and at least know some of the basics. But beyond just the experience, we also want a proven track record of success or advancement. If you've been in the same level of sales, or in a similar trajectory for 5-10 years, and now you're looking for something different just for the sake of something different, that's not necessarily ideal. But someone who's shown a consistent advancement or a demonstrating a success in sales is always a bonus. Beyond that, we also look for someone who has experience in generating their own leads. And not that you have to have been a world beater and have had these crazy numbers, but just that you had the confidence to get on the phone and make the cold calls, to walk through the office building and give your pitch, to be in front of someone and try to sell them a car, or be in someone's home and talk about pest control services. So those are some of the things that we look for. And then beyond that, personality wise, we want someone who's confident, we want someone who's hungry to learn, and we want someone who's willing to make that extra phone call, to take that extra step. And we have a few ways through our interview process that we'll try to find out if they are that type of person. That's what we look for.
Does the real estate experience thing matter? Do you view people who have some real estate experience, in a different light than somebody that doesn't?
Yeah. It's definitely a bonus. If they own a rental property, or maybe their family owns rental properties, or if they have their real estate license, that certainly is a bonus. But where it can potentially become maybe a hindrance, or maybe something that we want to take a closer look at, is if it's someone who's been a realtor for a period of time and is now looking forward to step into a business development role. Because what we found a lot of times, those realtors who are looking for that, they really just want to get out of the commission, the day-to-day grind of commission only type of role. But this role still has all of that same grind. You're still going to be doing all of the same things. You're just paid a little bit differently. Yeah. So if that's what you're looking for, this probably wouldn't be the right fit. So that's the only thing to think about with real estate.
Well, and I would imagine too, like you'd have to be leery of, like right now, for instance, right? The sales market is not as hot as it was. And so, is this person just like, selling real estate's really hard right now. I'm going to, it'll be easier for me to do this. And it's like, well, not necessarily. I mean, we would say the market is better for property management, but you don't want that person to up and leave as soon as the sales.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely the case. I will say one thing we are seeing because of the shift in the market, we're seeing some related industries like mortgage and title, and some of those folks, are kind of in that position where they're just not getting as much business, just period. Rates are going to affect that. Just something we've noticed recently.
I really liked what you said about, somebody having experience generating leads. Because I think that, if you're not, for someone that doesn't have a sales background, right, you think sales and it's just one big bucket, right? But the reality is that, I could be selling shoes at the mall and all I'm doing is talking to the people that walk in my store, right? That's a completely different sale than somebody that is out farming and generating relationships and new leads. And if someone is only used to working leads that are given to them, right, that just come in the door, I would imagine it's probably a pretty big shift to then try to have to generate your own, right?
Yeah, big time. And it's sometimes we've done it, or in our view, we need to have seen that experience because, people will tell you up and down that I'm willing to make the cold calls, I'm willing to do this and that. And sometimes that may or may not be the case. But yeah, that's definitely, true what you're saying.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about the process. I mean, are there types of, questions or personality assessments that you guys use to get a better understanding of, who a person really is and what drives them? What have you found to be successful?
Sure. So we've used, half a dozen different personality tests, and with varying results. Some are definitely better than others. But that said, some of our best hires were 50% matches, were 60% matches. And if we're going with, using that as our first screener, we're really missing a lot of people. And so we've actually gone away from most of those personality tests. In some cases, we will use them if we have a few good candidates who, we're trying to choose between. We may ask them to take one or another. But for the most part, we have a series of questions that we ask to really understand what experience level is, what drives them. And then we also have a few different ways we kind of research them and figure out, what's their public persona. We have them jump through a few hoops for us, send us a video and a few other things. So the interview process is more than just the initial interview. And going through that, we get a pretty good idea of where they're at. And then from there, after the hire date, the really important thing is tracking everything. And within 90 days, we're going to know one way or another whether they're right fit or not. In most cases, if you do a good job screening up front, they're gonna progress.
How long, in your experience, does it typically take for you guys to find a good candidate? Or if I came to you today and said, hey, I want to hire a BDM, what kind of timeline am I looking at?
Great question, because a lot of people have totally different views on how long it might take. But in our experience, anywhere from 30 to 90 days is average. But we have had some hires that took 5 or 6 months to find the right person. But in that time, we're making offers to candidates and things are happening and things are moving along, and then, something comes up. So what we tell our clients is that, you've hired us to make sure that you don't make a bad decision. And a lot of times business owners are telling us, what about that, the person we talked to a couple months ago, let's bring them back in. And we're saying, no, we don't want to do that. They're not a good fit. And, so we're in it for the long haul, as far as finding them the right person. And the way our contracts work, we're aligned in that way as well. So, that's the timing is, it's going to take as long as it takes, but, nonetheless, 30 to 90 days is pretty average right now.
Yeah. Well, I know that's a tough question. I mean, I'm sure some of it's dependent upon market and, what the company is willing to compensate someone for sure. But I mean, to your point, right? Like you can't let the desire and urgency to get someone in the seat force you to make a bad hire, right? Because we know how expensive that is to hire somebody that doesn't ultimately work out, the time you spend training them, that sort of thing. Let's talk about the success side of it. So someone, they're hired in as a BDM. I'm curious to know, obviously from your perspective and the ongoing work that you guys do, but also like for a business owner, when they've hired someone to be a BDM, what are some of the things that you see are most important to setting that person up for success from the very beginning?
Sure. Yeah, I like what you said from the very beginning, because that really is the most important time when you've just hired someone. Unfortunately, we've seen over the years, we've seen good BDMs who've maybe kind of gone away because, they didn't feel the structure of the initial start on. So some of the things that a business owner needs to, have in place when hiring a business development manager, you need to make sure that you have time for them, to meet with them and be present, answer their questions and be kind of someone that they can lean on. So a good way to do that is having a series of KPIs that you're going to go through and review with them. And then the second thing is just make yourself available. It's as a business owner, you have so many different things going on, but being able to pop into their office and ask them a quick question or send them a message on Slack or text or whatever is really important for a new hire. So those are some of the things from an owner's perspective. As far as training, we want to give them all the information and make sure that if they want to take it and run with it, they can. We don't want to hold anyone back. But at the same time, we want to make sure there's structure along with that. And that's what we try to do through our training program.
I'm glad you brought up KPIs, right? Because I think it's really important. Like if you expect for someone to be accountable to your expectations, you really have to make it clear what are the things that we're going to be looking at. And, in my experience, it's helpful to look at the results, but especially early on, it's really helpful to look at the activity, right? So what are some of the KPIs that you guys really emphasize and you would say to a business owner, these are the things that you need to be asking your BDM on a weekly basis? Like, what are you really doing and what are what are the seeds that are being planted, I guess?
Yeah, man, couldn't agree more. And that is certainly something that we focus on is tracking activity, especially in the first 90 days. And that's how we know if someone's going to be a good fit is, are they at least, putting in the effort? Are they taking the steps that we know they're going to need to take to be successful? Because if they are and the results just aren't there, that's one thing. But if you're not even picking up the phone, that's a totally different thing. So as far as tracking activity, we have an activity tracker that we give every client, and it's broken up on a week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter basis. So the BDM will go in there and report how many calls did they make, how many meetings did they have, how many scheduled phone calls did they have, as far as social media, what are they doing on social media, what are they doing as far as agent referrals, and there's 30 or so line items that they can quickly go through and fill out. Takes them 10 minutes or so. But what we get is either a red or a green. Either you hit your activity goal or you didn't. And, not hitting it 1 week is not the end of the world, but if we see a trend, week over week, month over month, that's something that in our weekly meetings, me as an owner or, a business owner could talk with their BDM and go over with them. So yeah, tracking activity is huge, and that is certainly one of the ways that we figure out really early on if someone's going to be a good fit long term.
Well, and I would imagine too, I mean, beyond those first 90 days or so that they're with you, I mean, if you're really being true to that accountability and having your BDM report those week over week, I mean, you're going to be able to see in those lulls, right? Like when the results aren't there, like, okay, are they still taking the reps, right? Are they still invested in this? Because what you don't want is, for somebody to miss activity goals for a month and then all of a sudden you're having to like scramble to figure out what's going on, right? Whereas if you're meeting with them week over week, you kind of have a pulse on where things are. And this, I mean, sales is so much about like the mental motivation, right? And guess what? If you're not mentally checked in and you're not feeling motivated, you're not going to pick up the phone, right? So maybe talk a little bit about that, like, in the instance of somebody that is struggling and isn't hitting the numbers they need to hit, like what do you recommend as far as coaching that person up, whether it's you or a business owner trying to get them back on track?
I think it starts with having a good plan. And what I will tell BDMs is that we have a good plan. I can tell you we've seen it. The results are in. If you do these things, you will be successful. And I can show you people who've done it, and I can show you people who haven't. And it's kind of that. It's really that simple. But even with that, even if you have a great plan and they have all the information, they're doing it right, sometimes the results don't come as quickly. And I'm thinking of a client we had in St. Louis, and they were starting from scratch. They had maybe 10 doors in that market, and there was a new market they were expanding into. And the BDM there, she was doing all of the right things. She's hitting all of her activity goals, but the numbers aren't there. And she came to me and was just like, Brian, like, what's going on? I'm doing it, kind of what's going on. And my only advice I could give to her is just be patient and keep doing it. Keep pounding the rock, is one of my favorite sayings there. But keep pounding the rock. And she definitely did not want to hear that, I could tell. But she did, and she kept doing it. And a couple months later, she signed up 50 units. The month after that, she signed up another 30. The month after that, and she's killing it now. And they've added a couple hundred units in her first year there as a BDM. So make a great plan. Say, here's what we're going to do to generate leads and close leads, and then just keep pounding the rock, and you'll get there.
Well, and I think that is a really important point because in my sales experience, like I've certainly fell victim to this of like, if you're trying something and you feel like it's not working, right? And what you're going to see is it's kind of going to tail off. Like, all right, I'm going to make 20 cold calls a week, and you do that for a month and you don't get anything, right?
Yeah.
It's going to get harder and harder to make those calls. But the problem is you're abandoning the strategy before you've really been able to see the fruits of it. And so I think committing to what are the types of activity that you want to do, and really committing to it, not letting your emotions get in the way of, man, I just feel like this isn't working, so I'm going to stop doing,
Yeah. I think also, we tend to feel like the things that we don't like to do aren't working. It's easy to put off the, and cold calling is one of them, and sometimes it doesn't work. Not every, marketing activity will work. But I think also sometimes being honest with ourselves of, is this really not working, or am I not really liking doing this? That's kind of an internal check you have to give yourself. But I think sometimes that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the training side a little bit. You touched on that. As far as, like, if I was a BDM that I was just starting out in the industry, let's say I had no real estate experience, how would you go about training me? But also, like, how would you encourage me to train myself a little bit? Like, what are some of the things that you'd recommend so that somebody that doesn't have a whole lot of experience could get up to speed on the industry and really what they need to be doing?
Sure. Well, as far as our program goes, we have an online course that we give to all of our BDMs. So if they're the type who wants to just take it and run with it, they have all the information. They have all the recorded sessions. They can take it and run with it. But in addition to that, we're meeting with them each week. So we're actually kind of walking them through that material, making sure that they're understanding it, and helping them implement and put everything into place. So that's, at a high level, how we go about training a BDM. Also really important, you mentioned someone with no real estate experience. Really importantly at the beginning is to make sure that they understand the business and, what a property manager does, how you guys do it at your company. And that's one of the things that we put our BDMs through when they first get hired as an onboarding course. And part of that is meeting with the team, understanding, what your leasing coordinator does, what your maintenance, coordinator does, the property manager, and they ask them a series of questions to understand their role and what's important and what's not. So those are some of the things that we go through in the training to kind of bring them up to speed.
Awesome. Well, that's super important, right? I mean, you obviously want them to understand the industry dynamics of, what it is that you're doing. And, I tend to think, like, if somebody has real estate experience, it's helpful, but property management is a pretty unique niche within the real estate industry. The other piece, though, is I think is interesting, is like helping them understand, like, the mind of an investor as well. And really understand that avatar of, like, what matters to a particular client, because it's not always the same. I mean, the biggest difference tends to be like that accidental landlord versus very intentional investor. But even within that, there's nuance as well. Any advice you'd give on, like, if somebody really needed to learn up on, like, investing in general in real estate if they didn't have that background?
Yeah, I mean, Bigger Pockets is a huge resource, and that's where I learned most the knowledge I have of investing, and it's a great resource. They have cost calculators, they have educational courses and things like that. Also, finding your local real estate investors association. That's an avenue to potentially get property management leads, of course, but it's also a great place to learn and hear what's important to investors, and they tend to be kind of geared more towards new investors, which is great if you're trying to learn kind of the basics of real estate investing. So yeah, that kind of goes with it. I kind of also wanted to touch on, so the training program kind of goes into that, and so I think one of the when you're hiring a business development manager is you don't just want to make them feel like they're stuck with the leads they got. You want to give them avenues and training to grow beyond what's currently coming in the door. So at the beginning, we focus on sales training, sales process, understanding the mind of an investor, understanding the mind of an accidental landlord, making sure you know how to close those leads. Now let's talk about how you can generate more leads for the business and get where you want to go.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, and it sort of goes to this. I mean, obviously, the theme of our podcast is Grow Outbound, right? How do you go out and generate that stuff? And so it's interesting to me, like there's so many different, whether it's referral relationships that you're building, or, true cold outreach where you're sending mail or email or phone, and, making cold calls even, I think everybody has their own bias towards what works and what doesn't work. If somebody's coming to you and saying like, hey, we need to go out and find more people to talk to, how do you generally help them navigate that? Or is there a certain formula that you guys follow, or is it really dependent on the person?
Yeah. Well, it does depend on the market and, the company and the person and the owner as well. What resources do we have? Where are we starting from? And a lot of that goes into it. But in general, there are some, kind of tried and true methods to generate business at your property management company. And I'm sure most people listening have heard of most of them. Agent referrals, staying active in social media and social media groups, creating relevant content, attending events, maybe sponsoring events, speaking at brokerages. And these are the things that we focus on training our clients. But beyond just saying, hey, I want you to go ahead and call brokerages and see if you can, speak to their agents. We're going to give you the script of, how that call should go, training on how you identify not just any brokerage, but the brokerages you want to be part of. So I think the money or, the success is all in the execution. Pretty much everyone knows that agent referrals and SEO and creating content is a good thing for your business, but how do I do it? And how do I do it effectively? And we've taken, as a BDM and even in growing BizDev, we've learned a lot along the years, so it is certainly a work in progress, but those are some things that you can kind of, use as a foundation to grow on, especially if you're doing it effectively.
That's awesome. Well, I love what you said about execution, right? Like you could have a great game plan and a great idea of how you're going to go about it, but at the end of the day, at some point you've got to stop, brainstorming and start actually doing it, right, and executing on it. And it's helpful to have, a formula and a playbook that you guys have run in lots of different markets, right? And doesn't really matter what the market is. Like you can make this stuff work where you are. So I've got one closing question for you, Brian, and kind of back to what we were talking about before with thinking about somebody thinking about hiring a BDM. Let's say I'm at that point. I'm kind of mulling it over. I've never hired a BDM before. What advice would you give me as a business owner as I try to navigate that decision?
Yeah. Well, I would ask, are you currently able to handle the number of leads that you're getting right now? And if the answer is no, I'm not effectively handling them, I would say, okay, well, how many are you missing? If it's maybe one a month, that may be one thing, but if it's a handful a month, I would say, you're missing out on potentially 60 doors each year just from what you have coming in. And that's more than enough to pay for BDM salaries. And that compounded year over year, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. And something I think owners in that situation don't usually realize is how much they actually are missing. Because we know being in sales that so much of closing and getting the business is follow up, and business owners notoriously are being pulled in a million different ways, and don't always have time for follow up. So that's one consideration. And then the second consideration, the thing I would ask is, are you the right person for this job? Are you in the right seat? Are you the one who wants to go to the events, who wants to create the content, who wants to do these things that you're going to need to do? And if the answer is no, it may be now, it may be later, but you're going to want to look at, hiring someone to fill that role eventually. So yeah, some of the things to think about.
That's awesome. Well, I think you made an excellent point there, which is not like as it relates to comp, because I'd imagine for some people that's part of the equation, right? Can I afford to hire?
Sure.
Well, it's not necessarily can you afford based on what you have right now, the door count you have right now, and the revenue you have right now. It's the missed opportunity of all these doors that you could be closing, not just the ones that 60, for instance, like 60 leads that you weren't, doors you didn't follow up with properly that you could have signed, but it's also all the ones beyond that 60 that could have been generated if you had really been focused on sales. So I think that's such a great point. And it certainly takes it takes recognizing, right, to even be able to answer the questions that you just asked. It takes an honest look at where you're at, and you may anecdotally feel like, yeah, I'm good at this, I'm doing a good job at this, but if you dig into the numbers and the leads lost that you didn't have time to follow up with, the answer might be a little bit different if you're being honest, right?
Sure. It often is, yeah. But yeah, it's a good drill to do. Anyone listening who's in that position, look back at your calls that have come in, and are you following up with them at least 9 times? Which I don't know if I'm getting that stat right, but 9, 10 times the average amount of follow-ups it takes in order to book the sale. And I would guess that most business owners who are handling sales would probably say no. So yeah, something to think about.
Yeah, great point. Well, that's awesome. Brian, this has been a super helpful conversation. If folks want to learn more about BizDev Mastermind, what's the best way for them to find you and get in touch?
Yeah. Well, my email is open. You can shoot me an email, brian@bizdevmastermind.com. That's Brian with an I, classic Brian.
Yes.
So you can send me an email there. And or you can visit our website, www.bizdevmastermind.com, or check us out on Facebook. We have reviews, testimonials. You can see some results of other BDMs and what they're doing this year so far.
I love it. Well, and Brian, you guys do a great job of putting out content. So I'm sure if somebody wants to learn more, there's plenty that, just looking you up on Facebook or YouTube that they could go find. So Brian, thanks again for taking the time with me. This has been super helpful, and I hope that our listeners out there were able to take something away. So thanks again, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you at whatever the next conference is that we'll both be at.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. We'll see you soon.